Every day, Nigerians they lose confidence on our judiciary. You know, so the talk say judiciary is a hope of a common man, but no, our judicial system don dey messed up. Politicians don pocket many judges. This na the reason why people dey speak against the move by Wike to build house for Abuja judges. Attorney Kila now don come and come talk say the failure or the inefficiency of the judiciary of any state is a clear indices of a failed state.
So, Professor, what do you make of the former president's comments on calls for new leadership in INEC, new credible leadership in INEC?
Well, I think, his comment is not a surprised comment. It's not something you don't expect. Generally speaking, in the country, INEC suffers from a deficit of trust and a deficit of, sort of accomplishment. I do not think, of all the things Nigerians do, I do not think INEC is one of the things we're proud to export, or even we're exporting it. I've not read any literature that is citing INEC as an example of good practice. I am of the school of thought that INEC needs to be overhauled. So there's nothing that the former president says that has shocked me regarding INEC specifically. And I've read a lot of commentaries of people, accusing the former president, of various kind of sins. I have criticized him as well in the past. But on this one, I want people to look at the content and not the person, or as, the common thing, to look at the message, not the messenger. I think we need to ask ourselves if what he's saying makes sense or not. I think it makes sense. And I think it is possible to envision a new kind of INEC that is very different from this one. And we can talk about that.
Would you agree with him when he says that the chairman of INEC, Mahmoud Yakubu, should be sacked?
Well, I mean, I do not like to personalize issue, but I do think that if somebody is heading a commission, and the commission, if it's doing a process, and every time that commission acts, people end up in court, they don't agree with it, I think the mandate of such leadership should be looked at, yes. It is safe to say so. I do my best not to personalize issue, but that's a direct question you asked me. And I think, yes, if he's not sacked, at least he should be probed. Somebody should sit down and ask him a question to say, dear Professor Mahmoud, how's this thing going? Or as we say in Lagos, how far?
Well, the former president, suggested that mock elections should be held prior to the real elections. He said that the mock elections should also be witnessed by international observers. How feasible is this?
Well, I think clearly President Obasanjo is reading some book on project management, and that's what you do before a project. You want to mock it. Students who know about mock exams, project managers, and people who develop apps who know about the alpha test and beta test and all those kind of tests. I agree that there should be some kind of test. I do not know how feasible it is to do a proper mock election, and the viability of that. But I do believe that a proper dress rehearsal is necessary so that we can avoid some very elementary errors like starting late. Those are the kind of things that could be avoided. I do think some dress rehearsal needs to be done. I mean, let it be clear. I agree, or rather I'm pleased to see that President Obasanjo agrees with me that INEC needs to be overhauled.
Moving away from INEC, the other part of Obasanjo's speech, some are wondering what the point of all of it is, and especially with the timing, and whether or not constructive criticism offered in public forums to the government in any form it actually moves the needle in terms of righting some of the wrongs or the issues that are addressed. Does complaining ever get us anywhere? What can we expect from this?
Well, I think there are three sides to that. Number one is that if you give a high-profile lecture like that, I mean, one will expect something tangible to come out of it. You cannot go and give a Chinua Achebe lecture, and just give platitudes. One expects, something very cogent, even controversial. To that extent, I think it's a fantastic speech that he has gone to give. Should we all agree with his speech? I think not. It is very legitimate, possible and legitimate, to disagree with any speech, including Chief Obasanjo's speech. But when we disagree, there are three kind of disagreements. If you are a citizen, you should be looking for what is not true in what he says. If you are perhaps an analyst or a student of literature or political communication, you should be looking at the structure and the content and the possible effect of the speech. If you are in government and he has given a speech against you, you'll be trying to prove him wrong. It's not a question of argument. If the man says you have a failed or failing state, you should do things to prove that he's not a failed or failing state. So, we need to go past this, anybody just waking up and saying whatever they like. By the way, OBJ is not anybody, in terms of his political experience, in terms of education, and in terms of gravitas in the world. So he can speak, more than most people. So when he speaks, I think most of us, the rest of the world, should just study it and see where they can make amends, not go and insult him or just push back. That's a bit shallow and lazy way of doing things. But in terms of, yes, does he have consequences? You ask. Yes, I think it does. We're talking about it and people are thinking about it. And I think those who care about the country and hold their job with seriousness will try to take serious what he says. By the way, when he talks, those who matter in Nigeria listen, and I think outside Nigeria a lot of people listen as well. So it does matter what is said in this kind of conversations.
Former President Obasanjo also said that a number of judges are in the pockets of wealthy politicians and that they make judgments not based on the law, but to the highest bidder. Now, how do we change this narrative, that seems to be widely accepted as the truth regarding our judiciary in Nigeria?
You see, those are the two crucial elements in what you've just said. Number one, my bigger concern is that it is widely accepted. That's a very terrible thing, and you're not making it up. I say this because I speak to people for conversation and for research. And there's a general acceptance, there's a tendency to actually believe that our judiciary is corrupt. By the way, just a few hours ago, a few days ago, a report came out showing that our judiciary is very corrupt. That's a very dangerous place to be. The way to get out of it is two things. One, for the members of the bench themselves, the leaders, not just the members, the leaders of the bench in particular, to come out and say, this is unacceptable. We're going to clean up the substance and we're going to clean up the image. If it is not true that the judiciary is corrupt, then the leaders of the judiciary needs to look at whatever is making people think they're corrupt and deal with it. If it is true that the judiciary is corrupt, then they need to clean up. And they need to show people that we have decided not to be seen as corrupt. And these are the steps we're taking against it. Part of the step will be welfare of the judiciary. If they're so poor that they're tempted to take bribe, we better pay them more and give them a better life. But if beyond their poverty, they're just greedy or corrupt, then we need to clean them up and punish a few of them so that the rest can see that it is not good to be corrupt. By the way, it is important for us to remember, all of us as citizens, to know that a corrupt judiciary is one of the index of a failed state, because if you cannot trust those who are charged and paid to arbitrate conflict, then the essence of the question, the essence of being together is failed. That is a very bad place to be.
Fair enough. And what do you make of the presidency's reaction, well, its strong reaction to former President Obasanjo's lecture?
Well, I think I do not like, self-centered reactions. I think there's a part of me that's very parliamentarian. I think government should speak with acts, not with argument, not with counter-insults, propaganda, or proving people wrong. If I had my way, if I was president of Nigeria, I was near the president of Nigeria, the communication of the presidency, and indeed any part of government, will be by facts and figures. Let those running for office campaign, let them do propaganda. A serious government should speak by facts and figures. They should say, we're doing these 200 things to achieve these 500 things. And the communication should be very clear, straightforward like that, so that you can verify it. Once you are in power, you are above everyday dispute. That should be left for people who are ambitious to get into power, or people who are unhappy because they're out of power, or people who pontificate or analyze. Once you're a government, you should govern.
But this issue, focusing on the messenger instead of the message, it seems to be a continuous sing-song, for this administration. And even the previous one before it, we've been hearing, stories of how the opposition political party destroyed Nigeria so much and they've been working to rebuild. But it's a bit worrying, isn't it, that almost 10 years after taking power, we're still having this same issue. So what does it say about the mindset of our leaders? What does it say about our democracy in Nigeria?
Well, I don't think there's anything peculiar about us. The only thing that is peculiar about it is that we allow it to happen. And I want everybody, all the viewers now to look at themselves and to look at the person next to them. Given the chance, people will blame others rather than take accountability. It's a human thing. It's a lazy, shallow way of doing things. I said before, you want to blame the next person. It's never you. That's a human thing. But what we should do when it comes to institutions, the state, the Commonwealth, is that we should not allow personal and individual flaws to prevail. We should allow institutional sense to prevail. And the way to do that is to insist that no, if you hear somebody say, oh, we're resolving the problem of the past, say no, don't do that. The reason why you're here is to resolve the problem of the past. I remember, you're right, this is not a new thing. I remember about 10 years ago or 9 years ago, when the former administration started this, allow me to say this silly thing of blaming the past. I remember saying very clearly, let's stop blaming the past. Because the reason why you're here today is because Nigeria condemned that past. So let it go. Tell us about your solution. I think somehow, starting from the media, if I might say, to institutions, to educational institutions, religious institutions, and in country clubs, we need to change the conversation and force people to take responsibility once they're in power. Nobody forced any governor or any president to apply for office. They went there voluntarily. So we must assume that they know what they're going to meet when they get there. So there's no point feeling sorry for them and say, oh, you don't know what they met there. Well, I might not know what they met there, but it's their duty to know what they're going to meet there. And if they don't know it, tough luck. They should just roll up their sleeves and get on with it, not disturb the rest of us with what they met there.
And isn't that the entire issue, this philosophical, sociological issue we have of human nature and how it comes into play when power is involved, how most people err on the side of being horrible individuals rather than stepping up to the challenge of being better and working harder. So with saying all of that, how do we move forward? INEC, we know its issues, we know the individuals that are within it. Obasanjo has suggested excising the cancer by removing bits of it immediately, but where does one start? Especially if we know it's a human nature issue. Human beings tend to be terrible. It's a vicious cycle. So where do we start?
Well, allow me to enjoy your tract. I want viewers to know you're a reader of political philosophy, and that's a very beautiful thing. This nature of human beings, we must pack it outside. Once we get institution, while human beings are personal, instinctive, and sometimes selfish, when we deal with institution, when we deal with the Commonwealth, we have to be rational, we have to be collective, and we have to put our best feet forward. Not because all of a sudden everybody in power has to be a genius, but because the act of government is not an act of one person. It is not the character of one person that should be reflected. Rather, it should be the fruit of deliberated effort of many who are charged and paid to deal with governance. That's the way it ought to be. That is generally. Specifically in terms of INEC, I think some people need to get together and imagine, then design a new INEC. Bearing in mind that this INEC must not only be competent, must be seen, must be perceived by all as competent as well, so that whatever it does, we know it's done. Personally, if I was with those people, I would propose an INEC that is very digitalized, an INEC that is very decentralized. I would, for example, argue that one of the first things we need to do, or one of the things we need to do, is to link the BVC with the, is it BVN? PVC with BVN. I would argue, for example, that instead of queues everywhere when it's a year or so to election time, let the registration exercise be continuous, and let us outsource a huge part of it. For example, just the way banks give out ATM, since we've linked BVN with PVC, let bank be in charge of giving out PVC as well. You go and collect in the bank. If you don't have a bank account, we'll try to meet you at your needs. But frankly, I also believe that if you don't have a bank account in 2024, I'm not sure you should be voting at all. But you know, that's me.
Well, Professor, just before we let you go, the former president touched on the issue of state capture. He talked about the sale of government assets to a few elites. He talked about the Emilokon philosophy and, of course, you know, an individual extending his 25-year rule, you know, of a particular state. What are your thoughts on all this? And do you really believe that indeed there is state capture? How do we reverse this? Is it possible to reverse this?
I believe that the fear of state capture, the risk of state capture, is always there. I also believe that what allows the former president to throw a critical, negative assessment blanket on the current administration is because, quite frankly, the current administration is not perceived as doing well. If you judge it, it depends on how you judge it. If you judge it by the cost of food, by the availability of money for most people, not a few, if you judge it by the rate of current exchange or the cost of energy, petrol, electricity, and number of children out of school, then you can see why it is easy to say, oh, the state is not going well. I think that gives credence. If the country was in a place where people were getting jobs, food was cheap, everywhere in the country was safe, and things were better than it was yesterday, nobody's going to even listen to what the President Obasanjo is saying. It will appear strange. The reason why we're talking about it is that it is credible. What he's saying appears credible because of the way the situation is. To fight state capture, you know, which is a real thing. State capture, just for our viewers, allow me to, in less than 30 seconds, to say that state capture is what happens when a part of the state, a very tiny part, use their influence, either personal interest, ethnic, religious, or business link, to take what belongs to the rest of all of us, and you know, nepotism and all things like that. So the way to fight it is to use transparency, build institutions, and insist on accountability of everything that we've done. So every inch of what is of the Commonwealth, of the state, should be accounted for and should be rationalized. That's the way to deal with it.
Well, very well said, and always great to have you here on the program, Anthony Kila, Director of the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies.
You understand? Now, what is this one in now that tell us now, they say, if any nation judiciary they fail, or they know they effective, or they don't they compromise, now one of the indices say, the system of that state, everything when they say they do, we can't get common, we can't full everywhere. You understand? This thing no good for our country, because now the judiciary, when the common man suppose they run to, when they say the common man the judiciary might be the last hope of the common man, the failure don't they everywhere now. You understand? You know, make sense. So the judiciary make on they listening to people, make on they call themselves to order. The judges now senior men, people papa, you know, they do things with reasons. Now they do things when go make sure say give a restore now integrity, and to make sure say Nigerians still get hope on now. Now to get court case now for the country na problem, because we don't know who our many Nigerians they believe now say our court now the highest bidder now they win. So if you broke, no reason to go court.